Hello, and welcome back to ACTV. I'm here today with Traycee King, who stars and also helped create one of the stories in Pulp Modern Die Laughing. So, Traycee, as I always ask my guests, why don't you tell my audience who you are and what it is you do?
Well, hello everyone. I'm Traycee King. I am a producer of horror films and I am also an actress. Started out as an actress, and when the new media boom hit, when YouTube first dropped, I joined a lot of people and was like, I'm going to stop waiting. I'm going to make my own thing. And then I made a horror film, or a web series actually. And then life kind of happened and now I'm here. And then I met you.
What was the horror film web series, if you don't mind my asking?
Yeah, it's called 813, 8.13, as in Hitchcock's birthday. When I first met the director, his name's Mondo Franco. We first met up on MySpace, and he asked me, I always put 813 in because I always have to have my nod to Hitchcock. And I was like, well, why don't we just put it in the title and call it 813? And then we tied it to a biblical verse that we kind of thought sounded a bit zombified, is live through the flesh, not through the deeds, or something like that, in 813. And that was the web series, and it was about zombies and three different points of views from it first happening on the first 12 hours.
So you mentioned MySpace, so I'm imagining this was somewhere between '06 and maybe '09.
Oh, oh, 11
Oh,
is when
11,
we
really?
11 was when we stopped filming, when we stopped filming the first season. So we started, yeah, '06 was when we started getting sort of little tiny things going, and then 2009 was, that's when we started really making it, and then 2010 we started posting it.
Oh, when did
Yep.
MySpace kind of go away? Do you know?
uh I feel that it went away sort of in 2015, 14. I deleted mine a long time ago though, like way before that, like 2012. I feel a lot of people moved away from that and onto Facebook just because it was just seemed more accessible. The algorithm anyway.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I just read a short story by somebody referencing MySpace, and it was funny that MySpace now is an element of nostalgia because
No way.
yeah,
Wow.
it's a long, the world in the last 10 years alone, the
Yeah.
world has skyrocketed in terms of how quickly, in some ways, how quickly things move. It's a very different world now than it was just 10 years ago.
You're absolutely right. It's almost, and honestly, I have this conversation with other people where I say, I can't believe I'm actually, or I'm, as in we, like we are living in the apocalypse. I didn't think I'd actually see this. Like it is a wild future for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's not get too depressing and talk
Oh,
about how shitty
uh,
the world is. It's shitty, but it's also, you know what, individual people, just normal people who don't have power or anything, make
yeah,
the world great anyway, no matter what's going on. So I
yeah,
always kind of look to that.
yeah.
That silly thing that Mr. Rogers said about look for the helpers. That's what keeps me going, you know.
I absolutely love that you keep that sunshine on. Like I absolutely love it.
Yes, I'm well, you can ask anybody. I am a sunshiny person. Um, I noticed on IMDb you have a lot of acting credits.
Yeah,
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Some of the work that you've done as an actor?
absolutely. I've actually done stunt work from TV shows like 11th Hour. I got arrested for shooting up Marley Shelton's character. And then I did some of my own acting and stunt work in a Terminator Salvation. It was like a tech comp web series that was kind of in linking. It was one of the first of its kind to like a web series to a movie to promote a film. So it was along with Terminator Salvation, and it's still on YouTube if you want to look it up. but I did my own stunt work and acting for that, and that was a lot of fun. And I can say most of my acting parts came from my military experience, um, but I've always really liked doing more like softer pieces, not necessarily the tough ones, like the more softer or like kind of aloof characters.
How much did your, if you don't mind talking about it, how much did your military experience kind of inform the directions you've taken since leaving the military?
I wish I could say I was an individual, but I think that my military training has gotten me to where I am today, and has taken a lot of uh, it's taken a front seat in pretty much a lot of my decisions. And I maybe think that's a good thing too, because I was really shy in high school, like painfully shy, and then I joined the military, and then I became more confident and self-aware, and I think that that actually helped me too. Just a little bit, just hey, maybe my voice does matter and I can speak up for myself a little bit. So that actually helped.
And can you tell us about, so you obviously have an interest in horror. Can you talk about how that interest came about?
Yes, so my dad, when I was 5 years old, he okay, so we owned a Betamax. I don't know if anybody will know that, but it was before VHS. And my dad had over 100 movies, and I swear we were like our own little blockbuster. And one day he pops on the thing, and it was way after the film release. And I was like, no, this is awful. There's no way. And my brother called me a chicken. And I got so upset that I was like, I can do this. It's no problem. And then I watched it like a champ, but then I actually got interested in it. And then my dad started talking it down like the science, like, okay, now look at the effects. And then he started talking about Rob Bottin and like the directors, and we're like little kids, and we started getting into the like the more like the art of it. So much so that we even got into Jim Henson, which kind of coincided really if you look at it, because of the whole like how everything kind of works together and how they built monsters back then. So that was my influence, was my father and my brother.
And in addition to The Thing, what are some movies that were really influential for you?
Oh, The Beast Within. I don't that yeah, we were really little. I know that we had no business watching that, but uh to be fair, it really taught me to be aware of my surroundings. So The Beast Within really affected me. Poltergeist, because I was really little when I saw that, so I identified very well with Carol Ann. Um, and well, and that character, kind of like her innocence, like you want to hold on to the innocence even though you've seen some stuff even at 5 years old, like you know. But that's why I think I gravitated towards horror even as a little kid. Like I really started looking at the world around me and started like making everything more inward and into horror. It was kind of an outlet.
Yeah, so you kind of make me think of a question I often have myself.
Mm.
What in general do you think is the appeal or the function of horror for the average audience member?
Well, for the average audience member, I think the appeal is just that it's a fun adrenaline ride, and it's safe, and it's from your movie seat, your the couch. No one's getting hurt, and you're just having this really fun ride with your friends, and you can just really get into it. But on a deeper level, like if you're really like if you're going to watch horror by yourself, for the average moviegoer, it really starts to it actually helps you ask questions about where you're at, and where we're at in society, because I think in this point, like when we ask the question, art imitating life or life imitating art, horror is one of the only genres that really imitates life, because
Can you
life
give
is
us
just way worse. Life is just way worse than we could ever do in horror. And I don't
Did
mean, I'm
you?
not getting depressed. I'm
Yeah.
sorry about
No,
that.
it's okay. It's all right. We can talk about
Yeah.
anything. We do
Yeah.
free speech here at ACTV.
Eh,
It's gotten
yeah.
me canceled and in trouble a lot, but I don't give a
Ah.
shit.
Well, I just talk
Um,
about like the like when I go into that kind of stuff, I just want to like say that I really go into the like how effective it is for horror and storytelling, like how we can pull from our surroundings and make something so impactful.
what are some examples of some movies, some horror movies that you think really reflect reality?
Jacob's Ladder.
And how so? The original? You're talking
Uh
about the original? Yes.
Tim
Yeah.
Robbins. Oh,
Tim
is there another
Robbins.
one? Oh, I
Oh,
don't think I've
they did some, that during that whole spate of reboots and remakes, I know there was a Jacob's Ladder one in there at some point.
oh, I don't
Like
think
it,
I haven't seen it.
I wouldn't bother. The original has the pedigree of Bruce Joel Rubin, the writer, and then Adrian Lyne, who was kind of a hit or miss director, but I think he did pretty good there.
Oh,
And then, like you said, Tim Robbins
shame.
and who's the woman that plays his girlfriend?
Oh,
Uh,
oh yes, she's in Batteries Not Included. I keep forgetting her name, but she is insane. She's one of the actresses that actually molded me when I was younger, and I can't believe I'm blanking on her name.
is it Elizabeth Pena or something like that?
Pena, yes, Pena,
Pena, yes,
Elizabeth
right.
Pena. I believe I'm saying that correctly. Yes, yes, and she was
Yes.
also in Rush Hour.
And she was in I think Lone Star. It's a John Sayles movie.
I haven't
Not
seen it.
horror. Yeah.
I'll have
No,
to
it's
watch that.
yeah, that's a very good movie. John Sayles is an independent, just non always independent director. Like his whole career has been independent cinema, and he's very left wing, but it's okay. I mean, I think he's a good storyteller. He made a movie called Matewan that I kind of consider, in my opinion, it's like the best indie film of the 1980s. But
Mm,
anyway, she's in that one too. So anyway,
nice.
how does Jacob's Ladder reflect life?
Well, it's along with the thing, I think it's really cool because it actually started a conversation about not just like the outward things that scare us, but what are the things within us that scare us. And with Jacob's Ladder, it deals with PTSD and veteran PTSD. So that's why I gravitate so much towards it, because I myself am a veteran. And then when you go with the thing, John Carpenter was like, oh no, this isn't an alien movie. This is a movie about paranoia. So it was like when movies like that started to pop up, where they were really starting to go inward, that's when I'm like, that was like that was it. That's where I'm like, that's definitely where it reflects. It's just way more prominent, I think, in those types of movies.
Well, I agree with you. And for a while, there was a general theory that as long as society leaned to the right, horror thrived. And so in the 1990s, you have this lean to the left once Clinton becomes president. And I don't want to
Mhm.
get too political, but there was a
No worries.
shift, a cultural shift.
Hmm.
And to me, the 1990s is really one of the very worst decades for horror. A lot of people will hate me for saying that, but
But
I don't
you're
know,
allowed to have an
Jacob's.
opinion.
Well, Jacob's
You're
Ladder was 1990, and there are some good horror films in the 90s. I think Candyman was a great horror film.
right. Those
Um,
are also tone pieces too. They're not just I mean you're right, because it's like if you look at the 80s versus the 90s, I mean, yeah, there's some really good gems in the 90s that are like Scream was a cultural phenomenon just because of the messages, like especially for the younger generation. But like you mentioned Candyman and Jacob's Ladder, and like movies like that are more like inward. They're more like the microscope in. And I think that's why they were so effective, because they were still kind of going for that 1970s 80s feel.
Yeah, well, I think Scream and Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and even to some degree, Jason Goes to Hell, were that was the dawn of postmodernism kind of taking over horror, or at least mainstream horror. Which is, I know some people love that, but
Right.
for me,
Yeah.
it's almost a death knell. At least it was for a little while. But in the late '90s, you have David Lynch making Lost Highway, which I think is maybe the scariest movie of the '90s. And
Lost
even Twin
Highway.
Peaks, yeah,
Twin
Fire,
Peaks.
yeah, Fire Walk with Me. That's a very heartbreaking and scary movie. And Mulholland Drive, of course, which was in 2001. So it's like Lynch in a way, in an odd way, because nobody thinks when they think David Lynch, they don't automatically say he's a horror film director, even though he's put some of the most horrific images on the screen.
Right.
Um, but I compare it to in 1959, Elvis went to the army, Buddy Holly died, Chuck Berry, I think, went to jail. Little Richard became a preacher, like rock and roll in that one year just vanished. And it didn't get revived until the Beatles showed up. And so in between, the guys who kept rock and roll breathing were the goofy guys like Pat Boone and the Fabian, the teen idols. So
Yeah.
I almost think because the '90s were kind of stale, and it seemed like horror might be on life support,
Yeah.
and then Saw and Hostel actually I think really revitalized horror in the
Man,
mid 2000s.
you should teach a history of horror class at like a I'm serious because I mean, you've really experienced horror through all of its ups and then it's all of its down. And I mean, you know what I mean? Like you got to see all of that shit like all the cool shit happen.
So you're saying I'm old?
No, no, not at all. Like I'm saying you got, yeah, I mean, I got to see a lot of cool shit. But you got to see way more cool shit than me. And like I just remember, I mean, like if I grew up in the '70s and had a memory of the '70s, that would be like that would be really cool for me because that kind of horror and those images scare the shit out of me. But to be able to see that transition, like that kind of a transition, because that really does give you just like I mean, yeah, I could sit here and listen to you all day talk about, okay, like, and this is why this was important in history because this happened. And then eh, it could be a history, what was it, history of horror theory class or something like that.
Well, a lot of people will disagree with me. There's a lot of people who love Scream and they love that late '90s slasher revival.
Hmm.
But look, Scream is a pretty good movie. There's no debate there. But it winks at the audience, and I've just all that kind of stuff. And I've written scripts like that,
Yeah.
but I'm just at a point where like I would rather just see a story and just kind of get lost in it and not constantly be reminded how clever the filmmakers are.
That is fair.
Yeah.
I see what you're
uh,
saying.
or or at least or save the clever for the craft, or the structure of the story itself.
Right. The
Um,
natural occurrences of the story.
yeah, Scream is really it's a dual thing with me because it did draw attention to the slashers, the early slashers, which I think had gotten lost by the late '90s, and people kind of laughed at them, and there's that whole um, just taken for granted that the slasher is about some puritanical girl who survives an attack by a killer who like a he's a reactionary force who's killing the kids who are having fun. But when you go back and you watch those early slashers, the final girls are having just as much fun. Like the whole
You're right.
slasher thing, it starts with Black Christmas, and the final girl in that one is pregnant when the movie starts, and she's trying to get an abortion, and her
Oh,
boyfriend
wow.
is pissed off about it. And then Carpenter really borrowed a lot from Black Christmas to make Halloween. And Jamie Lee Curtis in that movie, she smokes weed. She's got the hots for Ben Tramer. Like she doesn't really
Yeah,
seem that Puritan. Like she's like a
right.
she's a bit of a goody two shoes, but it's like, well, somebody needs to be watching these kids.
But she's right, like she's skirting the edge because she's about to. She could definitely. She's ready. You know what? I can see where okay, people might be upset, but it's like you have a point, and we're all allowed to have our opinion. And I think that's the point of a lot of these classes is that a lot of the professors do have strong opinions, right? And I mean, I'm not pushing and saying you should be a college professor, but what I'm saying is like these are actually really good points. Like you're bringing up points that are where horror is really really strong and powerful and can be used as a tool where it really just it can strike a chord within society. Whereas in the 90s, yeah, we got a bit lazy and that but it also showed exactly where we were at the time because if you look at what was on TV, and I'm not gonna lie, I was in high school in the 90s. As soon as I got home from high school, it was a bag of Doritos, a big old thing of Sunny Delight and Ricky Lake and Jerry Springer. It was just the 90s was abundance and just numbness. So the horror, so when I'm if you look at the horror and it's like there was an abundance and there was a bit of numbness there. So you're not necessarily wrong because again, that is where horror is really, really good. It's a good indicator of where we're at in society. It's a good measure.
It's true, and I think another. So I sometimes put a lot of the blame on Slick Willie, Bill Clinton, because he was so like I voted for him in '92. He was so mellow and
Mhm.
he chased women and he smoked weed even though he didn't admit it, and he liked rock and roll. I was like, this he dodged the draft. Of course, I was in my 20s and I was like, yeah, I don't want to go to war.
Nobody wants to
Um,
go to war.
yeah.
Nobody wants to go to war.
But the other thing that happened was the supposed fall of the Soviet Union, and I think and the supposed end of the Cold War, which has for some reason been brought back recently. But
Yeah.
I think people were ready to relax in the 90s. Like
Yeah.
the growing up in the 80s, where you were reminded every now and then, you were reminded at any point if one of these jackasses that runs the world presses
Mhm.
the button, that's it.
Yep.
Right?
I
Whatever you
remember
had
that.
planned for next, yeah, whatever your plans were for Saturday, forget about
Yep,
it.
I remember that, and I remember that because I remember being in sixth grade, and that was always. But I was a Navy kid too. Like my dad was in the Navy, so of course all the military kids would always talk about their dads having to get deployed and stuff like that. So yeah, in the 80s, you're absolutely right. It was constantly like, oh, and are they going to target a military base was always our biggest question. But in the 90s, a lot of us let, and I'm not mad at it. I'm not mad at us being able to let go. I
Oh,
think it was
that's
great.
what
But you're right about the horror though.
well, but I mean it goes along with that notion. If people feel generally okay, then horror is not going to do well. Because horror really like modern horror, contemporary horror really takes off in the 60s. And we know the 60s was a turbulent decade. The 70s was turbulent. The 80s was turbulent, even though people have this shiny, happy memory about the 80s.
Yeah.
It was still
Yeah.
very turbulent. There was AIDS and the crack epidemic, all this stuff, like all these communities getting decimated,
Right.
and the Cold War still going on. Um, it was, I was a teenager, so I don't know how observant I was at the time, but when I look back on it, it makes a lot of sense that all that like the great horrors beginning with Psycho and then Night of the Living Dead and Texas
Mhm.
Chainsaw and Halloween, it all culminates in the 80s being this explosion of horror. Plus
Absolutely.
the Savini who went to Vietnam and saw real violence coming back and I think causing a revolution in special effects. Um, and then yeah, the 90s we were relaxed. And
Yeah.
so it
That makes
you
sense
know,
though.
well, and even in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, he makes the point. He says, the first Freddy was vicious and mean, and we got relaxed and turned him into a cartoon character. and then the whole point of the movie is that he comes out into real life. Like if you don't suppress that the animal side of humanity in fiction, it will release in reality. And I guess that's why by the end of the decade, well, 2001, we had this horrific attack, and then nobody was comfortable again. And
Yeah.
this,
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then now it's like you've just all had this array of just different horror, and now, I mean, the horror now with some of the new crop that's been coming out. I'm not super, I hate to admit it, but I have kind of started living under a rock. So I'm
oh,
not super up on who the up and coming youngins are, but I know uh seeing some of the other, like the horror that's been coming out lately, some of it's been very chilling, and I'm hopeful. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens, especially in the next, at least in the next 5 years. I'm expecting an uptick in horror for sure. And I'm crossing my fingers that it's like the kind that I'm hoping it is.
yeah. Um, well, we survived a kind of a spate of, like, the big studios wanted to control horror around, between about 2005 and 2015. So you had all those
Hmm.
PG-13 jump scare fests. But indie horror, I think, has been persistent and really driven home the point that's where innovation happens. That's where the good stuff is happening. I think like It Follows and The Witch. These are
Oh,
all great, great movies. Couple of, I'm not going to mention
Midsummer.
names.
Oh,
Yes, Midsummer. Yeah, I have to watch that one
it
again. Yeah.
yeah, it affected me, but I am also, as a woman,
Uh-huh.
it's going to affect me differently than a man. Um, but I think that one and Hereditary, it's just oh, and and I really did like the remake of The Evil Dead. I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was quite fun.
Which remake?
Evil Dead.
Oh, Evil Dead. Oh, really?
Yeah,
From like 2013 or?
I think it was 2013. I remember just being really fun and drag me to hell. I thought, like during those time periods, I thought that was actually uh I thought it was actually really fun because, again, but that was actually more, those movies were looking more inward. And I tend to miss that sometimes. Like, oh, I do like movies where it's more about the human condition versus what's going on outside. Maybe that's why I like them so much.
Yeah, well, there's been a couple of big movies this year that I was really looking forward to, and I'm not going to mention names, but um, they had great. The first two-thirds were fantastic, and then the last third they just completely collapsed. And in both, I'm thinking of two movies, and in both cases, what happened was, as I'm getting into the movie in the first two-thirds, I'm starting to think, well, how are they going to end this? And then the first most cliched way to end it comes into my mind, and I'm like, they're not going to do that. They're gonna come up with something very surprising. But no, they went exactly to the most obvious way to end the movie. So I'm hoping that it does not become a trend. I
Oh
wonder if it.
man, I'm
Yeah, I wonder if
curious.
it's.
I'll have to get you to text me because I am curious. Because movies like that scare me, and not in a good way.
Yeah,
Well, I'm
but we saw
curious.
with Pulp Modern, Die Laughing, all the short films that I've gone through to put that one together, and now we're working on putting the next one together. Um, the people making short horror films, indie horror films, are really creative. They're really doing great stuff. It's really, and this kind of leads me to a question I wanted to ask. I've noticed with the release of Pulp Modern, Die Laughing, it's very difficult to get people to watch an indie film today because Hollywood in the 90s, when Sundance was a big thing, Hollywood created these boutique studios like Fox Searchlight and I think like Warner Classics or something they called it. and
Hmm.
they tried to take over the indie scene because that's hard. That's difficult competition for them because they have to make big multi-million dollar movies that satisfy stockholders. So they can't take
Right.
risks, whereas indie films can. So Hollywood wanted to snuff that. Um,
Huh.
and what's happened in the process is that the general public doesn't really know what an indie is now, I think. And so
Right.
when they see like, oh, this little movie that's playing on Tubi, like, oh, that I'm not gonna. My own. I talked about this with Ryan actually. My own dad said a few years ago. He said when he's watching Netflix, if he doesn't see a familiar studio emblem in the beginning of the movie, he won't watch it. He'll just turn it off. And I said, Dad, that means you're never going to watch one of my movies. And he
Right.
was just like, ah, sorry.
Oof.
So,
Ouch.
well, it's my dad he has the mainstream mentality.
Focus.
I want to watch something that the masses have approved of. That's his mentality. Um, and I guess he's older, so maybe he's like, I don't have time to waste. Like this indie could be good for 30 minutes, and then after that it could go downhill, and then I've
Oh
wasted 30 minutes.
goodness. Oh goodness.
But
Yeah, you just kind of wrinkled my brain about something. Time definitely is not the biggest commodity for I feel like time is one of the scariest things about horror of all, and it has affected each generation differently because way back in the day, kind of what you were saying, people were expecting to live not, I mean, just a couple of decades, and now people are almost like, oh God, I'm 120 tomorrow. Are you serious? So yeah, it's really strange to see uh, exactly where what people are just like, where their priorities are based on where their scares are, and time is definitely one of the biggest scares of them all. That is, I hadn't thought about that since my grandfather. Because that was his, and that makes total sense. Like, why would you waste your time on something when you don't think you have any? But yet they lived so long.
well, what would you say to just the average person who's not too familiar with the whole indie film scene? What would be your sales pitch to them to say, hey, maybe stop going to see the Marvel movies and the Star Wars and all that shit that we've seen 1,000 times before. And
Yeah, I'm kind of mind blown actually. I did not realize the indie scene was going down that badly, but I will say this: without indie film, I, as a person, just a person of who was bullied, would not have believed I could have made it out. It was because of a movie. It wasn't even that. I mean, it was a big movie, but it wasn't that big and advertised at the time. It was called Blood of Heroes, and it was a Rutger Hauer movie. But there was a little teeny tiny known actress in there called Joan. Her name was Joan Chen, and I'd never seen an actress like that looked like me before like that. And she got out of her little farm town and became one of the biggest badasses. And that was a bit indie for me. That was indie for me because that was not like in movies. That was like, it was HBO. Like, and you were lucky because you had to pay for HBO too. It wasn't like you could just, so for me it was kind of, I don't know, like indie, it was just kind of like uh what would you say? It was like very niche. You could only watch it in one place, right? So, as far as indie films go, those are, like you said, those are the stories that take chances, and those are the ones that are actually going to hit closer to home. Those are the stories you're going to identify with the most. Those are the struggles that are actually going to hold the bigger stakes for the average moviegoer. They're looking at these big Marvel movies, and while they are great and have these really great messages, the thing is like it's also completely out of this world and not down to earth, where the average person is just like paying their bills and just trying to get by. And that's the whole point of indie filmmaking, is like, just one of y'all, we're just like, I'm going to tell a story while I'm trudging along living this really crappy life that we're being pooped on, but I'm going to make an indie film and put it in the mix to mess up whatever they got going on, because it's like, y'all really need good stories. The average, I mean, it's just, you're missing out on a lot more soul than you think. If you're not going to watch indie, then you're missing out on some soul. That's it.
Yeah, and I really think like with horror, going back to horror, um, one can even make the argument, almost make the argument that Psycho is an indie because Hitchcock funded it largely himself. But night,
Right. Yeah.
Carnival,
Out of pocket.
yeah,
Yeah.
Carnival of Souls, and then which influenced Night of the Living Dead, which influenced Last House on the Left, and then there's a
Oh,
whole all those Canadian movies, Black Christmas and Deranged, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, all that up to that point, that's all indie film, and everything that
hmm
horror is now kind of rests on those films right there. Like they
right.
kicked down the door. Not to mention what was going on with AIP and Hammer. You know, the great yeah, it's bizarre. The risks are taken in indie, and I maybe that says something about the audience that the audience doesn't want a risk. Like in the
Or maybe
Japanese
they
have a
don't know because they're being told what they want, and they're just like, okay, this is what we want because this is all right. But if they're told that they can take a chance, and it's like you actually do have way more time than you think to live your life, and you can take chances and like do things. And which also means you can take a chance to redirect your life. And I know that scares a lot of people, right? But that can, and that's why I think horror is so important because it goes even deeper in that if you even watch the what was it, that one with John Carpenter, uh Ryan, you just interviewed, he was the director and writer of Sloppy Seconds, but he just showed it to me. It's they John Carpenter, they wear the shades.
oh, they live.
They live. So he just showed that to me because I was dumb and never watched it before. And I was like, yeah, this is without if we didn't have those kinds of horror, like that those kinds of horror wars is they were the shades we needed. You know what I mean? Like that's what rock and roll is. That's what horror is. That's what all of that stuff is. It's about exposing, it's like, yeah, the audience might want to be comfortable, but like not all of us do. A lot of us want the freedom to do what we want and create and watch whatever we want. And I think that's what indie is.
Right. And sometimes the audience gets it right. I think that people might be shocked to hear me say this, but I think like Seinfeld was a really great sitcom. And in the 90s, I refused to watch it because it was so popular. I said, there's no way this could be good. Look at all these, like the same people that some friends of mine who are kind of yuppies, they got me to watch an episode of Friends, and I was so repulsed. And
It's
and
just so cheesecake.
yeah, and Seinfeld was coming on afterwards, and I was like, that's okay, I'm going home. And then in after September 11th in LA, like every channel was showing nonstop footage of September 11th for like 2 weeks or something. And finally, it was like channel 11 or 13 started doing Seinfeld and I Love Lucy marathons just to get people's minds off of it. So I watched Seinfeld and I was like, holy shit, this is really good. So sometimes and Seinfeld started out very much as kind of an independent thing. It was very low budget and they had no faith in it, but for some reason somebody at NBC stuck with it. And
Mhm.
then now we have this treasure. I mean, this show that's in, for in what the fuck is it called? Reruns, what
Yeah.
syndication,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Forever
Right.
and ever and ever. And really, no, it's so good it almost killed the sitcom genre because nobody can match it.
Right. Yeah, I've
Um,
actually heard that. I don't know if too many people get mad at you for saying that because it's like I've heard the same thing. I've never watched Seinfeld, but the few episodes I've seen, it's like they tend to have a lot of those questions. They ask a lot of questions, and I
that's
dig
true.
shows like that. And I dig how storytellers go about like their creative way of trying to get about it and answer it, or and maybe not even answer it. You know what I mean? Maybe it's like we don't have an answer for this yet because we're all going through this together or whatever. Like, and I think that's like the comfort of storytelling too, is that, hey, this is very hard, but there is a way to get through it. And once you get through it, it's probably not going to be easier, but there's always going to be a way through.
Very true. That
Yeah.
leads me to we need to talk about Sloppy Seconds,
Yes.
right? You helped create that and you starred in it.
Yep.
Can you tell us how that came about?
Yes, got the idea because my real second ex-husband cheated on me with a makeup artist, no names, of course. And I just decided I can't legally, physically do anything about it, so I'll just make a film about it because that is the most that then petty I will go. I'll make a film about it. But I thought it was pretty fun, and I talked with Ryan about it, and I go, Ryan, I'm a really huge fan of Tales from the Crypt, and he was like, I'm a huge fan of Tales from the Crypt, and we had Tales from the Crypt marathons, and he just went, and he just kind of went on a spiral of like Tales from the Crypt, like episode to get the feel of Sloppy Seconds. Because we had talked about, okay, this is like I told him the idea. This is what happened to me, and this is what I want to happen. And I want to say this one line. I think you can guess what line that is. But I just said, I just need this one line. Do whatever you want in the film. I just need this one line. And he's like, got it, done. And he wrote it. And that's what we got.
So you didn't have a difficult time playing that character. You were
So
maybe doing some wish fulfillment, or
there were absolutely some moments where I was not acting. Yeah, absolutely. I like how you took that sip there. Yes, I do like barbecue sauce.
oh yes. Um, well, who doesn't really? I will say, not to defend your ex-husband there, but I've never been on a movie where the makeup girls weren't gorgeous. Like they look like better than anybody else on the set. Like it's very weird.
Ashley, oh, the girl, oh, no, everybody on set was beautiful.
Oh yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I also like that. I don't know what's going on, but I feel that everybody's going through a bit of a Benjamin Button thing, and everybody's starting to look very attractive. And maybe we're
Really.
starting to get into a midsummer. I don't know. Midsummer Scream also did just happen. So maybe I'm just in that midsummer mood. I don't know. I also identify as like the goat, just, Pan the goat. Let's party, everybody. Maybe that's what's going on.
So you think people are getting better looking? Is that what you think?
That's what I think. That's what I absolutely believe. Yep.
Well, that's good news
Yeah.
because I was a little kid in the '70s, and I can tell you that was the day of the ogre.
Ah,
Everybody was
that's
no
okay.
no.
We all went through an awkward stage because I looked like a bean, like a little string bean. So we all had an awkward stage.
Well, I'm talking about society, but I will say that
Oh,
women in the 1970s were drop dead gorgeous. Like they were
wow.
unbelievably gorgeous. And the only thing that happened in the 80s was I think a lot of people using cocaine became hairdressers, and the hairstyles, like the girls that I went to school with, when I see their yearbook pictures, I'm just amazed that nobody told them this is not a particularly good hairstyle. I don't know too much about hairstyles, but the teasing up and all that stuff, it's uh, it's very bizarre. But luckily, it was just that one decade. So
Yeah, I think it was like at some point it became almost like an armor tactic at one of my schools. Not, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a fun, like, how high can I get it? Like,
right,
how flashy can I get? So it almost became bragging rights.
really,
Teenagers are funny.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we do weird shit. Did weird shit. I'm not a teenager anymore. What am I talking about?
Well, I had a funny haircut too. I mean, nobody's innocent of this problem. It's just
Oh,
you
yeah.
combine you you combine like a lot of psychedelic drug use
Well,
and
in my case, I was just 5 years old. I didn't even have to do that. I was just high on my own ridiculousness and cut my own hair.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, our time here is just about up, but why don't you tell my audience what you have in store for the future?
Yes. Well, for the future, I have a future TypeScript that I am working on right now. It's called Project Entero. And it is in like Jacob's Ladder, and that is about my experience being experimented on in the military. And it is a sci-fi crime horror cyberpunk set in the future. Think Mad Max meets Jacob's Ladder meets The Cell. And I'm hoping that this is maybe this will like spark your horror your spark your horror motor a little bit there. Maybe you'll be like, hey, this has got something to say. And maybe cross your fingers. I'm actually trying to get your approval actually.
That's Oh, I'm sure it's going to be great. I've heard your story about what happened in the military. That's absolutely horrific. Um, um, is this a short or a feature?
It's a short that I actually do want to make a couple of features, but I have a short concept, just kind of a little bit of concept to show, because I know right now that's what people want to see before they see a feature film. And it doesn't hurt to make short films anyway right now because people don't mind watching short. I mean, as long as we keep that indie movement going, hopefully people won't mind seeing more short films.
Yeah, well, and I kind of optimistically hope that at least for short filmmakers that the our culture has a very abridged attention span, and the short film should cater to that. Um,
I
the whole
hope so.
TikTok thing, yeah.
Yeah,
And people, it's like short stories. People need to kind of remember that you can do a whole lot in 15 minutes or 11 minutes or whatever it takes. And sometimes those films actually have a lot more impact because the medicine is delivered so quickly.
absolutely. That's why I think I'll always love the ones like Creep Show and Tales from the Dark Side. Like those will always be like movies like that will always be my bread and butter.
Yes, Creep Show is fantastic. I don't Let's not launch into a creep show right now. Maybe we'll have another interview in the future and we can talk about Creep Show.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We can have a
Um,
Creep Show watch-a-thon and have reactions. I'd be down for that. That'd be fun.
yeah, I've been watching a lot of these reaction videos and I'm not sure what I think of them. Um, because they are sometimes entertaining. Like there's a woman who watches James Bond movies, that Sean Connery, and she's a young woman, and it's to me it's just hilarious when he does something like he'll slap a girl on the butt, and her reaction to me it's just hysterical because
Oh my gosh.
she doesn't know how to react. She's like, because I think she likes Sean Connery, but at the same time, like her modern sensibilities are like, that's not appropriate.
How
Like,
how dare you?
yeah. Okay, well, Traycee, it's been very good talking to you. Hopefully, I didn't talk too much. Hopefully, the audience actually got to hear you say a thing or two. But definitely, it's a good conversation. We should have another conversation in the future. And as for now, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And definitely look forward to talking to you soon about more horror.